Jiminy Christmas, a girl got killed.
We tried everything possible to get him help.
It sounds like there's a lot of missing pieces that weren't followed up on, and I'm probably one of them.
He wasn't letting me out of there until I confessed to it.
Sometimes the truth's more important than justice, you know?
There are about 191,000 documented cold cases in the United States as we speak right now. Do you think all those parents and all those are going to get fair justice? Hell no.
I'm Amber Hunt, and this is Accused, the unsolved murder of Elizabeth Andes. In some ways, I feel like a stalker. For nearly a year, I've been tracking every waking moment, every conversation, every move of a woman named Elizabeth Wells Andes. I never met her, but I have her picture on my wall and my desktop and my cell phone. I know her face so well that when I flipped through a yearbook and saw an uncaptioned side profile picture of her as a freshman in high school, I recognized her right away. I'd never even seen her profile before, but I had studied her face. My favorite photo of her looks like it was shot in someone's backyard. She's looking at the camera and flashing this engaging smile, the type that makes you smile right back even though you're only looking at a picture. Even though we've never talked, I feel like I know her. I think I would have liked her, which makes all the other photos I have of Beth even harder to look at. Naked, bound, and bruised, Beth was murdered when she was just 23 years old. She was strangled first and then stabbed, 14 punctures in her chest and 6 more in her neck. The coroner ruled she had not been sexually assaulted, though claw marks on her thighs seemed to hint that someone might have tried. The photos are so awful, so at odds with the happy memories of Beth that her friends and family have.
I remember her certainly as really being pretty happy, smiling, laughing, having a good time.
That's Sue Parmalee, one of Beth's best friends.
Yeah, I think she was happy with her family. She graduated, had a degree, was a pretty good student. Her personality, I think was easygoing.
There are some people in your life who, if you're honest with yourself, you'd have to admit would be a likelier target for something bad, something violent to happen than the rest of your friends. It's not PC to say it, and it certainly doesn't mean anyone ever deserves being targeted, but there are risk factors. Selling drugs, being a hothead, prone to fistfights. But Beth was none of those things.
How do you have a very good friend who's your wife's best friend, who we would have been lifelong friends?
That's Rich McCauley, a college friend who married one of Beth's roommates.
You get hit by a car, there's a plane crash, you have a heart attack. Okay, I get it. But to be brutalized this way was very hard to see and to deal with, and so.
Rich is a lot older now, older than he ever could have imagined himself way back when Beth died on December 28th, 1978. He and his wife Hallie are grandparents now, just like most of Beth's friends. Beth should be here, they say. She should be near retirement, enjoying grandkids of her own. She missed our wedding and the birth of our children and our ups and downs and trials and tribulations. More than that, she missed all of her own. Obviously, this is a tale about a murder, but I feel it needs to be qualified. I've told a lot of murder stories in my 20 years as a journalist, and this one's different. It's complicated and political and frustrating as hell. The people who are usually front and center trying to solve crimes are strangely quiet on this one, and there seems to be a reason. As much as this tale is about murder, it's also about a system and officials that might have fingered the wrong guy, and even 37 years later seem determined to pretend there's no chance they made a mistake. Let's start at the beginning. The year is 1978. Jimmy Carter is president, Laverne and Shirley is the top TV show, followed by Happy Days, and then newcomer Mork and Mindy starring a young and manic Robin Williams.
Until next week, Nanu, Nanu.
It was a big year for movies, too. Grease, The Deer Hunter, Heaven Can Wait, and one of my personal favorites, Dawn of the Dead. The city is Oxford, Ohio, a college town about 45 minutes north of Cincinnati. It's home to Miami University, where Beth Andes studied for 4.5 years. This is the type of town that transforms over summer and winter breaks when the 15,000 plus students flee back home and the city's left with fewer than 20,000 full-time residents. It's without question a beautiful campus with stately red brick buildings and cream-colored trim. The yearbook talks about the Miami mystique, and students I've talked to say that's more than just self-congratulations.
Had like a really nice campus, like it wasn't like really rural or urban, it was just kind of in the middle, so I like that too.
And it's still kind of close to a big town, right?
Yeah, you have options.
Oxford is the ultimate college town, honestly. This street we're on right now is called High Street, and I think they're within a square mile, I think there are 20 bars or something like that. It's like crazy. It's unbelievable.
It's actually population-wise, I call it the perfect mix because I can go to class every day and see somebody new, but at the same time, I'll see somebody I know. So I catch up with friends, I see friends everywhere, but there's always opportunities to meet and talk with new people. So it's as far as the size of the school, I love that.
Those are some current students talking. So you might have noticed my voice in that clip. You'll hear me a lot through this podcast. I'm a reporter at the Cincinnati Enquirer, and I'm a true crime author as well. You might notice, too, that sometimes I'll refer to us or we instead of I. That's because I've investigated this with a partner, my producer, Amanda Rossman. She's waded into every aspect of this right alongside me. We text each other at midnight with theories and to-do lists. She's both endured and fueled some of my crazier moments. Here's us talking to an Oxford police officer. I understand that there are people around you who are still convinced something else, but we're working on this.
If everybody else is going to inject their theories, we might as well too, because it hasn't been pursued.
Yeah.
So at least flatter us by pursuing that option.
So back to Oxford. Generally speaking, this place is the definition of safe. This is a town that had 3 reported rapes, 6 robberies, and 12 aggravated assaults in all of 1978, according to FBI crime statistics.
The average policeman here in this small town will go to 2 or 3 burglaries a week. Those things happen. Homicides rarely happen.
That's Steve Schwein, a former police chief in Oxford. He started the job about 12 years after Beth was killed, and you'll hear more from him later. Beth started college in the fall of 1974. Soon she met a guy on campus, a quiet geology major and football player named Bob Young. They met their freshman year and became a full-fledged couple the next. Bob Young had also just graduated from Miami in December 1978, 1 week before he came home from Christmas break to help his girlfriend move and found her body in the apartment they shared off campus with Sue Parmalee. Police zeroed in on Bob immediately as Beth's killer. He was tried and found not guilty of the crime in early 1979. Many police in Oxford will tell you there's no mystery here, but rather a system that failed. Bob killed his girlfriend, they say, and the jury got it wrong. It happens. Well, if that's true, 2 separate juries actually got it wrong. There's more than one way to hold someone accountable for murder. In 1980, still believing police when they insisted they had the right guy, Beth's parents filed a civil suit accusing Bob of wrongful death. Remember, this is how Nicole Brown Simpson's family got O.J. Simpson. The criminal jury had acquitted him, but the threshold for civil responsibility is much lower than beyond a reasonable doubt, and the jury found Simpson liable. Not in Bob's case. Even with the lower threshold, the jury in 1983 sided with the defendant. You might think, okay, so 2 juries found the case against this guy, Bob, to be lacking. So surely police took a breather and then came back to look at everything fresh, right? Well, that's not what happened. A headline in the Enquirer ran March 23, 1979, declaring, quote, "Oxford murder closed despite acquittal." The man who prosecuted the case is quoted in that story as saying it's absolutely ridiculous to think anyone other than Bob Young killed Beth. Joseph Statham, the police chief at the time, told the reporter that he believed wholeheartedly he had the right guy. He said, quote, "The jury found him innocent, and we have to live with that," end quote.
The thing about it was the police got onto the boyfriend.
This is Alan Gerard speaking. He worked as a handyman at the apartment complex where Beth was killed.
And once he got off, they stopped the investigation, even though they said he couldn't have done it. The timeline wasn't right. I think it came down to it. But
Right.
once that was established, they just quit and didn't try to find anybody else.
So you noticed that at the time, even?
Yeah. I went, well, if he didn't do it, well, somebody did, but the Oxford Police Department just said, well, that was our boy, and we're not going to look any more further. And I went, well, that's kind of narrow-minded.
Right.
I don't know if he did it or didn't do it, but they still kept up the investigation.
Now, it isn't surprising that police looked first at the boyfriend. Any good detective would. You start with the people closest to the victim and eliminate those people before slowly broadening out the search. It's the concentric circle approach. That's why they took Bob straight to the police station after he called for help and started having him write out one statement about what happened, and then another, and then another. In each statement he wrote, he said he didn't have anything to do with this. But then he said he did. As with any case, there's more than one side to the story. And figuring out all the sides here is impossible because Beth is dead and can't fill in the blanks. So let's start with what we know for sure. Beth spent Christmas with her family and then headed back to Oxford on December 27th, 1978. That's a Wednesday. She swung by Bob's house in Fairborn, Ohio, on the way and hung out for about a half an hour. Bob invited her to stay for a party in town that night, but Beth declined. She wanted to get back to the apartment to finish packing and get started on her move. When she got back to her place, she found her apartment door had been left unlocked, and she thought a handyman was to blame. She was furious. The next day, December 28th, Beth started the day running some errands and got a speeding ticket about 9:30 a.m. She seemed in good spirits, Officer Roger Brooks wrote in a statement the next day. He described her as personable, an extrovert. Brooks gave her a ticket not just for speeding, but also for having an expired license. She tried to explain, "My birthday just passed. I'm about to move. I wanted my new license to have my new address, but I didn't have a new address yet." She left Brooks and immediately remedied the license situation. Then she complained to her apartment manager about the unlocked door, and then went to Cincinnati to put a deposit down on a new apartment. That day was a Thursday, and we know she made a few phone calls throughout that day. Sue Parmalee got one, and so did another good friend, Hallie Chapman. Beth talked about the new fry boots she bought for $75, a big purchase for a college kid that translates to more than $300 today. She also told them about her unlocked door in this kind of, can you believe it sort of way. Beth called Bob Young around 5 p.m., but he wasn't home. She didn't have her phone in her place anymore. It had been disconnected in anticipation of moving, and there were no cell phones back then, so Bob couldn't call her back when he got the message a few minutes later. So Beth called again around 7 p.m. This is where Bob picks up the story. He says he dawdled a little before heading out. He was still groggy from a party the night before and wasn't really in a rush to help anyone pack. He waited for his sister to finish in the family bathroom, and then he took a shower. He packed an overnight bag, forgetting a second pair of socks. This might seem like a weird detail to mention, but it comes into play later. Then he finally headed to Oxford about 8 p.m. We're pretty comfortable 8 p.m. is accurate because that's when Bob's parents left the house to go play cards at a friend's house. It's also the time that Mork and Mindy started on TV, which probably seems a weird thing to note. But a witness at a gas station where Bob fueled up his car said he couldn't have gotten there before 8 p.m. She'd been there visiting her gas-pumping boyfriend at work, And she hadn't seen Bob arrive yet when she left with just enough time to get home and make a sandwich to watch Mork and Mindy. In this world before streaming services and DVRs, this sort of timestamp matters. Bob says it took him 90 minutes to get to the apartment. When he walked inside, he found Beth beneath an overturned dresser in their darkened bedroom.
And I could see her underneath the dresser, and I threw the dresser up, and then it looked like she'd been shot. I mean, there was just looked like bullet holes just all over her chest, and had something stuffed in her mouth and around her neck.
Bob tried in vain to find a pulse, then ran from one neighbor's apartment to the next, banging on doors in hopes that someone would be home to answer. Because it was winter break, the place was deserted. He had to go into the next building before anyone let him use their phone. This is what Bob told us recently, and it matches what he told police 37 years ago, or at least what he told them initially. If that had been the only version of events he shared, we probably wouldn't be talking about this case today. So here's what police say happened. They say it only took Bob 75 minutes, not 90, to drive from Fairborn to Oxford. Their theory is that the end of college might have meant the end of Beth and Bob's relationship. And Beth was upset that Bob was thinking of going west to work as a geologist rather than staying with her in Cincinnati, where she had landed a job at Shillitoe's, a now defunct department store. Bob got fed up with her nagging and snapped, strangling her, and then, realizing too late what he had done, he grabbed a pair of scissors and stabbed her to make it look like a sex crime. Bob says police pushed this theory for hours, and he steadfastly denied it, but then, 15 hours after he had found his girlfriend's body, he agreed with police. Yes, he said, that's what happened. I got mad. I snapped. I killed her. I'm sorry. Bob recanted the confession within hours, and for the past 37 years, he's maintained his innocence. He says his incriminating statement came after he was bullied by police, threatened with prison, traumatized, and exhausted. He'd been up all night with them. He thought admitting something would end the nightmare he was enduring. He was desperate, he says.
But after I'd been in there a while and said, this is like a crime of passion, he says, you confess to this and you'll get 25 years and get out. And if not, I'm going to hang your ass out to dry. And that intimidated, that freaked me out right there.
Once someone confesses, you can't just take it back. Amanda and I spent long stretches in Oxford for the story. You walk anywhere and mention the 1978 case, and people know what you're talking about.
Didn't it have something to do with a football player?
Yeah. Well, he was charged for being acquitted, but he was,
yeah.
They remember Beth. They remember how pretty she was and how tragic her death. They remember that the football-playing boyfriend was accused of killing her.
All I know it was a football player. And I know they killed her in the shower and with a butcher knife or something like that.
So some people don't have all the details right, but they're still sure it was the football player, the boyfriend who killed Beth. Acquittal be damned. It's that confession that still has officials in Butler County convinced they charged the right guy. It's why they've refused ever since to look at charging anyone else. Amanda and I tracked down former Chief Joseph Statham, who's now retired in Oxford. He was a major player in the case back in '78, having been called in from home to help investigate. At one point, Bob Young was asked to pause writing one of his statements so he could go and chat with the chief. Statham met us recently in a fast food restaurant, which is why the audio's not the greatest.
Do you remember what it was like after the acquittal? Were people crestfallen? Were they disappointed?
I was disappointed. I don't know about it. I can't speak to the other people. I mean, our department. The guys that worked on the case were disappointed too.
Was it ever a process of thinking, okay, maybe we didn't have the right guy, or was it just,
No, speaking for myself, sure. I was convinced, and I know John Halcomb, our prosecutor, was totally convinced that we had the right guy.
Statham was really interesting. He kept saying, well, this was 37 years ago. I don't remember everything. He would kind of be cute about it. You were just a glimmer in your daddy's eye. But the truth is, he remembered a lot about it. He kept surprising us with how much he actually retained after all these years.
So one of the reasons this case stands out to me, because there are a lot of cold cases, but one of the reasons it stands out is because it seems like there are very smart people on each side who still to this day feel very strongly one way or the other, and they're on opposite sides. How does that happen? That intelligent people can
we're
come
human. We're human beings. I mean, you make the best call you can make with the facts you have presented to you.
Do you know after the acquittal if there were any other suspects looked at subsequently?
Not that I recall. Not from me. We felt we had the correct person. If there had been someone else that I thought was worth to look at, we'd have looked at them. I'm sure that the parents would like closure of a conviction. I'm sure of that. I wish that it had turned out differently, but I don't feel that we were wrong.
So just to hit it home so that I'm not misunderstanding anything, to this day you think that Bobby Young did this?
Yes.
What if you're wrong?
What if I'm wrong? What if the world ends today? What if the Lord comes back and we're not ready to go with him? I mean, what ifs is no way to, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
This cloud has hung over Bob's head for decades. It's why he chose to have the case files sealed years after his acquittal. He wanted to be done with it, to have his record cleared of this horrible thing. It's because of that seal that if you hop online to look up the particulars about this case on Butler County's court site, you won't find it. And this becomes problematic in a way I've never before seen as a reporter. See, Butler County officials interpreted the seal to mean that the crime itself could no longer legally be investigated. Here again is Steve Schwein.
When I started asking about the case, naturally I want to see the case report, and it's brought to me, and it's in a collapsible file folder, basically as I recall, and it's all taped up and says not to be opened, per the law director, I believe it said on it.
I'd never heard of such a thing before, but it was repeated to me by several sources, including a Cincinnati attorney named Deb Leiden, who began working for free on this case on behalf of Beth's family about 5 years ago.
I was getting a lot of pushbacks, in particular from the Butler County prosecutor's office.
Can you describe some of those for me? What kinds of pushback?
They were not interested in having anything released. And there was one attorney working with the prosecutor's office, and then there was a different attorney working for the city of Oxford, as far as the police department. And the attorney for the Oxford Police Department seemed a little bit more willing to work with us, but kept saying, well, you know, the file's sealed and they're worried about what they can do, and they're worried they're going to get in trouble if they do anything. I'm like, this is an open case, is it not? It's, you know, you don't have a convicted killer. You're still supposed to be looking at it. Is anybody looking at it? No one seems to be looking at it. Well, you know, their hands are tied, and on, and it really just seemed ridiculous to me.
To try and sort all of this out, I talked to Jack Greiner about it. He's the lawyer who represents the Enquirer in all sorts of legal matters.
A person who is found not guilty can go back into court after that and ask the court to seal the record. And really the effect of it by the statute is to essentially create a situation where it never happened. The arrest, the trial, everything is just sealed. And by law, a person who gets that order can truthfully and lawfully say on a job application, for example, that No, I've never been arrested. I've never been charged.
But it means that the arrest and the trial and all of that didn't exist. It doesn't mean that the crime didn't exist. I mean, does it make sense that they would stop investigating a crime because...
No, it doesn't. And, I believe that the law enforcement can refer back to the records for purposes of investigation.
It never occurred to Steve Schwein to push back on the county's legal interpretation of Bob's seal. He wasn't a lawyer, after all. They were. Nor did it occur to Bob that his decision to seal the case would mean that Butler County would quit investigating the crime altogether. He said his lawyer, Matthew Crehan, suggested sealing it so Bob could move on with his life.
So it was Crehan's idea to seal the record?
Yeah, he just wanted my name. It wasn't his idea to seal evidence or anything like that. That was all supposed to be available. It's the only thing he wanted sealed was my name and associated with all of it. And that's all he's done. I mean, he didn't want ever to be any evidence. If they could have used evidence to continue on, he was always behind that.
The case would have stayed stagnant if it weren't for Beth's family reaching out to an attorney friend who passed it along to Deb Leiden. She has been a pit bull on this thing. When Butler County prosecutors seemed unwilling to share case information because it had been sealed, she got Bob to sign an affidavit loosening the restrictions.
And they released part of the file, but they didn't release they didn't release a lot of the file. And they were blacking out information, and they were just keeping things from us. And I remember going into one of the hearings, and the attorney for the Butler County Prosecutor's Office came in and was encouraging the attorney for the Oxford Police, don't give her anything. Don't give her anything. Why are you giving her anything? If this is an open case, don't give her anything. You should, keep the file shut and whatever. And yet nobody was investigating it. Nobody was investigating the murder. Nobody had been investigating the murder for a long time.
Leiden says Butler officials still resisted, so she went through a judge.
So ultimately, the court agreed with us, and the order was clarified that the file could be released to the Andes family, anyone working with the Andes family, anyone the Andes family designated, and that there would be no problem if anyone investigated the case, and that they should be investigating the case, etc. So we were finally able to get access, and they trickled some more information to us. We kept pressing for more and more information.
This year, Leiden and the Andes family even had me designated a family representative. But that wouldn't sway the prosecutor's office into speaking with me. To really hammer home that Bob Young wouldn't sue them, we had him sign a witnessed statement granting county officials permission to talk with us about the case. Here's Bob reading it.
I, Robert Hayne Young, hereby grant permission for representatives of the Butler County Prosecutor's Office and/or the Oxford Police Department to discuss all aspects of the criminal proceedings that were leveled against me, and that despite the record having been sealed and with full knowledge that the representatives' statements will be publicized to web and newspaper readers.
I delivered this signed statement to Butler County officials, specifically directing it to County Prosecutor Michael Moser. He's got a lot of ties to this case, as Leiden quickly learned.
Ultimately, I realized that the same prosecutor who was standing in my way, at least the office of the prosecutor, Mr. Moser's office, involved a prosecutor, Mr. Moser, who had been the main prosecutor against Bob Young back in 1978 and 79, and had been there when they had forced a confession from him. And so it seemed to me that there might be more to the hurdles they were putting up than just that they typically would not reveal certain parts of the file.
Moser, that's spelled G-M-O-S-E-R, but the G is silent, was one of two attorneys back in 1978 who tried Bob Young. He was in the car with Bob Young when he was taken from Oxford to Hamilton for a polygraph in the early morning hours of December 29th, the day after Beth died. And as Leiden said, he was there when Bob eventually confessed. Moser tried the case alongside then prosecutor John Holcomb. 37 years later, Holcomb is dead, But Moser is still in the county, and now he's the top law enforcement officer. He refuses to discuss this case or pretty much anything else with the Enquirer. We'll talk more about that in later episodes. The important thing to know now is that Moser was a figure in the original investigation and remains an obstacle for law enforcement agents willing to resurrect this case today. He said decades ago in the Enquirer that Bob Young was guilty, and we're told by new investigators that he still believes it.
I mean, there have been a number of signals that I've gotten. For example, Beth's case is not listed on the cold case list, not for Butler County, not for the state of Ohio. I've tried to get it listed on the cold case list and have been told it has to be a referral from law enforcement. They've apparently not wanted to put it on the cold case list.
Designating it a cold case would mean it's unsolved, and she says Moser doesn't consider it unsolved. He just considers the trial unsuccessful. This is the case we're going to lay out for you over the next several weeks. It hasn't been a normal assignment for us. We've been working on this almost exclusively for more than 9 months, holed up in a tiny office at the Enquirer. It's unusual and, if I'm being honest, a little uncomfortable, for us as journalists to talk in the first person. We're trained to take ourselves out of this story, and we're not doing that here because we want to be as transparent as possible when walking you through how this investigation unfolded. Speaking of transparency, we do have an end goal in all of this. As lofty as it sounds, we want to solve a murder. Not we as in Amanda and I, but we as in we're hoping listeners can help. We've worked with cold case investigators to set up a tip line, and we'll forward along information to the few officials who are willing to consider that this case might still be unsolved. Someone out there surely has real information, not crackpot, pie-in-the-sky theories, but actual information. Someone knows something that maybe didn't seem relevant at the time. Maybe hearing the story will help jog a memory and help police catch a killer. That's why we're doing this. Over the series, you'll hear from many of the more than 4 people we've interviewed for this project. You'll hear from Bob Young and current investigators and forensic experts. You'll hear from best friends and coworkers. You'll learn about people they were uncomfortable with and people who made Beth uncomfortable in the days before she died. You'll hear from one guy with whom she fought and who left town just days after she was murdered. We've tracked down all of these people, including several people police said they tried to find but couldn't, in hopes of trying to figure out what really happened here. If there's any doubt how important this case is, listen to Beth's friend, Sue Parmalee.
Honest to God, it was hard just living day to day and not really worrying about, well, did the police get it or not, and then this and that, and just really trying to move on without losing my mind. So, I mean, I'm going to say, really, for a good decade, I mean, I would just cry all the time.
Sue said she focused on surviving. It didn't occur to her to badger police about the investigation after her friend Bob was acquitted.
And now when this comes up, I think, well, maybe I should have, you know. Maybe I should have fought for her instead of trying to forget it. I don't know.
She's not the only one struggling. Beth's family has given us their blessing and talked to us on the record, but you won't hear their voices. They want answers, and so they've responded to every question, no matter how minute or ridiculous, that I've lobbed at them. But they don't want to reopen some of the wounds for a national audience. What we have here is a puzzle, and it's the worst kind of puzzle. You don't know if you have all the pieces or if you've got extras that you don't need. It's like someone's stolen the box lid, and you've got no blueprint to follow, no clue what the picture is even supposed to be. Some of the pieces overlap, and others, I suspect, are red herrings. And on top of that, it's a 37-year-old puzzle. So some of the pieces are missing, and some of them are dead. Next time on Accused.
Hi, I'm trying to reach Patrick Baird.
Who is this, please?
My name's Amber Hunt. I'm a reporter with the Cincinnati Enquirer.
Okay. This is Patrick. What do you want to see me about?
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm a reporter. I've been working on a story taking a look at the 1978 Beth Andes case. And
I'm not going there. I've been retired since '96.
This is a special project from the Cincinnati Enquirer, narrated by Amber Hunt, produced by Amanda Rossman, edited by Amy Wilson, and engineered by Stephen Baum at Cincinnati Public Radio. Music was composed by Andrew Higley. To look at case documents, photos, videos, and more, visit cincinnati.com/accusedpodcast.